Hi, everyone, and welcome to Brown and Fortunato's webinar series for hospitals and health systems. My name is Elizabeth Jepson, and I will be joined today by Allsion Shelton. We are both attorneys practicing in Brown and Fortunato's healthcare group, and we look forward to discussing today's topic of Medicare surveys and frequently cited deficiencies with you. During this presentation, we will first discuss the legal framework governing the survey process. Next, we will provide a general overview of the survey process and the types of surveys that can be conducted. Then we will dive deeper into the survey process and provide some practical tips based on our experience with clients going through surveys. Finally, we'll identify the top 3 deficiencies that are cited against hospitals. Our goal with this presentation is to provide information that can help you and your organization adequately prepare and respond to Medicare surveys. We are happy to take any questions you have during the presentation at the end, but feel free to type them as we go along. This slide provides an overview of the regulatory authority governing surveys. Hospitals are required to adhere to an established minimum set of standards to continue to participate in the Medicare program. CMS established the survey and certification process to ensure that hospitals and health systems are in compliance with the applicable conditions of participation, or COPs. The hospital COPs can be found at Title 42, Part 482 of the Code of Federal Regulations. These COPs set forth conditions and standards for a variety of hospital operations, including nursing services, infection control, and governing board oversight. CMS delegates the authority to conduct surveys to state agencies. For hospitals in Texas, the Health Facility Compliance Group zone offices conduct Medicare surveys in collaboration with the CMS regional office in Dallas. To guide surveys, CMS has developed regulations and has issued interpretive guidance in the State Operations Manual. In the interpretive guidance, each condition and standard in the COPs is assigned an alphanumeric number referred to as a tag. On the screen is a page from Appendix A of the State Operations Manual, which discusses hospital COPs. I want to take just a minute to discuss the difference between a condition and a standard, which are highlighted here. Understanding the difference between a condition and a standard is key when you're responding to survey findings. The tag highlighted in blue relates to the condition for respiratory services. This is the overall objective. The hospital must meet the needs of patients in accordance with the acceptable standards of care. To achieve this objective, the condition includes specific standards. The second highlighted tag concerns the first standard for the respiratory services condition. That is, the organization of the respiratory care services must be appropriate to the scope and complexity of the services offered. Throughout this presentation, we'll discuss and distinguish between condition level and standard level deficiencies, so keep those differences in mind. This slide provides an overview of the survey process. First, prior to the survey, a survey team will be assembled. The number of surveyors on the survey team will depend on the type of survey and the provider's average daily census and complexity of services. Before arriving at the facility, the survey team will review information about the hospital to determine what potential areas of concern may exist and if any special COPs may be applicable. If the information in a hospital's record is incomplete or inaccurate, the survey agency will not be able to adequately prepare to conduct the survey, and the hospital may be cited for deficiencies. If your organization is not currently enrolled in PACOS, consider such enrollment. This will enable you to periodically review enrollment information on file with Medicare and to update information. When surveyors arrive at the hospital, they will meet with hospital executives to make introductions, describe the purpose of the survey, and provide an overview of the survey process. After the entrance conference, surveyors will commence the survey. The surveyor's objective is to assess whether the facility is deficient in its compliance efforts under the COPs. Moreover, the surveys will assess and impact such deficiencies on patient care. The deficiencies will be categorized as standard level, condition level, or immediate jeopardy. If immediate jeopardy is found, the surveyors will notify the facility of this finding during the survey, and the provider will be placed on the 23-day termination track. Otherwise, The facility will not know whether the deficiencies are at the condition of standard level until it receives the CMS 2567 report. If condition level deficiencies are found, then the provider will be placed on the 90-day termination track. Prior to leaving the facility, the surveys will conduct an entrance conference. The surveyors are expected to present a statement of deficiencies on the CMS 2567 form within 10 business days. Note that weekends and holidays are not included in the calculation of the time frame for the surveyor. In addition to the 2567 form, the facility will be notified of CMS's intent to terminate the provider's Medicare agreement if the facility receives any condition level or immediate jeopardy citations. The notice will also include information on the provider's right to submit an appeal. In response, the provider is expected to submit a plan of correction within 10 calendar days. Note the difference between the time frame for the surveyor's response, which is in business days, and the provider's response, which is due within calendar days, so that holidays and weekends are included for the provider's timeline. Failure to submit the plan of correction may result in termination of the provider's Medicare agreement. After a plan of correction is submitted, the state agency determines whether the response is appropriate. For any condition level deficiencies or immediate jeopardy findings, it is necessary for the provider's response to detail how the deficiencies have been corrected. These corrections must sufficiently convey a credible allegation of compliance. And remember the short time frame here. The provider only has 10 calendar days to prepare a response that sufficiently alleges the provider is in compliance with the COPs. Therefore, you should not wait until receipt of the CMS 2567 report. Immediately following the exit conference with the surveyors, take steps to correct and prevent the deficiencies identified by the surveyors during the exit conference. If the survey agency finds the plan of correction acceptable, then the state agency will submit the response to the CMS regional office for review and approval. CMS will then authorize the state agency to revisit the provider to ensure that deficiencies were corrected. If the provider is found in compliance during the revisit, then the provider is taken off the termination track. But if the provider does not sufficiently address the deficiencies, the state agency will notify the provider, and the provider may submit a subsequent plan of correction. When a provider is on the termination track, the goal is to submit an acceptable plan of correction in order to qualify for a resurvey. The provider will be taken off the termination track only if the provider is found to be in compliance with the COPs during a resurvey prior to the end of the 90-day or 23-day time period, depending on the deficiencies found and the termination track the provider is placed on. If the provider does not produce an acceptable 2567 response, or if the provider is unable to demonstrate compliance during a revisit, then the provider's Medicare number will be terminated either 90 days or 23 days from the date of the exit conference, at which point, if the provider has timely requested an appeal, the provider will be scheduled for a hearing before an administrative law judge.
This slide provides an overview of the 3 types of surveys. First, state agencies conduct certification and recertification surveys. A certification survey is an unannounced comprehensive survey that is designed to confirm compliance with all applicable COPs. Recertification occurs on a cyclical basis to confirm that the provider continues to meet the Medicare requirements. Next, state agencies conduct complaint surveys when a complaint raises a credible allegation of a condition-level deficiency. The survey is unannounced. CMS initially limits the survey to the conditions related to the complaint. However, CMS or the state agency has leeway to expand the scope of the survey if the surveyors identify additional problems. It is important to note that if your hospital is accredited, then you will not receive certification or recertification surveys by the state agency, but you can definitely be subject to complaint surveys. And state agencies prioritize surveys. The lowest priority will be initial certification surveys. On the other end of the spectrum are complaint surveys, especially complaint surveys alleging EMTALA violations. EMTALA is considered one of its highest priorities. In such cases, survey agencies will take prompt action upon receiving the complaint. Therefore, hospitals should monitor for situations that may give rise to an EMTALA complaint and consider self-disclosing the situation to the CMS regional office before a survey is conducted. There are provisions in the civil monetary penalties law that if there is an EMTALA violation, a mitigating factor in reducing any fines is if there was a self-report. And we've had success with assisting providers to avoid such penalties or to reduce such penalties by approaching the regional office and preparing a carefully worded self-disclosure concerning the EMTALA violation. Finally, validation surveys are performed on accredited hospitals. So the purpose of a violation survey is not only to look at the hospital, it also looks at the survey agency, the accrediting organization, to ensure that their standards and how they're enforcing those standards are consistent with what Medicare expects under the Medicare conditions of participation. If deficiencies are cited in a validation survey, the survey agency has the authority to temporarily remove the hospital's deemed status and to take jurisdiction over that hospital away from the accrediting organization and conduct any follow-up surveys and enforcement activities to bring the hospital into compliance. Historically, CMS has directed state agencies to conduct validation surveys on a random sample of providers within 60 days after the accrediting organization surveyed the provider. And as you can see, the purpose of this was CMS was double checking the work of the accrediting organization to see if they came to the same findings as that accrediting organization. This is quite burdensome, and in October of 2018, CMS announced a pilot program in which the validation survey will be conducted through direct observation of the accrediting organization. If this pilot program is successful, it should definitely reduce the burden placed on accredited hospitals through that they had recently been subject to or previously been subject to.
Now we will take a deeper look at certain aspects of the survey process. First, we'll discuss how to best prepare your organization for a survey. To ensure that your organization is prepared for a survey, we recommend that the entity develop a written survey protocol that outlines expected conduct during the survey. As part of the survey protocol, consider forming a provider team or appointing a survey leader who will shadow the surveyors during the survey. Shadowing the surveyors can help your organization better understand the findings cited in the CMS 2567 report. Some organizations find it helpful not only to appoint a survey leader, but a full provider team consisting of the survey leader, a scribe, and a courier. When the provider team is appointed, the survey leader will be tasked with accompanying the surveyor, cordially introducing the surveyor to each department, and relaying any requests to appropriate personnel. The scribe will be responsible for documenting questions and comments from the surveyor, the names of individuals interviewed by the surveyor, and the medical records, policies, and other documents requested or reviewed by the surveyor. This is a very crucial role because these steps will help your organization take timely action and thoroughly respond to the surveyor's findings. The survey report will provide overviews of interviews and the medical records to support any findings, but because the report is a public document, the names of any individuals interviewed will not be provided. Therefore, a scribe's notes are essential to verify the information in the survey report and conduct any root cause analyses necessary relating to the surveyor's findings. The courier on the provider's team obtains documents and materials requested by the surveyor, notifies the next department or unit of the surveyor's anticipated arrival, and keeps leadership abreast of the survey's products and matters that the surveyors are focusing on. All on and off-campus hospital departments, services, and staff members are subject to review. Therefore, when the survey begins, all hospital departments should be notified, and personnel at each hospital entrance should know whom to call if or when the surveyors arrive. Further, there should be a process to alert the next shift of workers when a survey is in progress so they know what they're walking into. For each department, establish a survey readiness checklist that can be reviewed by the department when notice of a survey is received. These checklists should include documents that are routinely requested by surveyors, like an organization chart and staffing plans for nursing services. For the full time the surveyors are on site, plan to provide a private, secluded space within the hospital for surveyors to complete necessary document review and analysis. All personnel needs to be trained on the survey protocol, and we recommend that mock surveys be performed. We've had situations where a nurse told a surveyor during an interview, "You're not going to come in here for a couple of days and tell me how to do my job." That is completely unacceptable and should never happen. Your organization needs to ensure that your personnel are familiar with the survey process and understand the significance and the purpose of surveys. They should know what to expect during a survey and how to conduct themselves if they are interviewed. Therefore, it's very important to provide periodic training on the survey process.
Next, we'll discuss what to expect during an entrance conference and tips for that conference. It is expected that during the entrance interview, the surveyor will first explain that all areas and services of the hospital may be surveyed. The surveyor will also coordinate with the provider on how to request documents. And finally, third, the surveyor will obtain contact information for key staff members. And finally, the surveyor will identify a tentative date and time for the exit conference. During the entrance interview, the provider's representative should explain their survey protocol. So if you develop a protocol where you have a survey leader or you have a whole provider team, take this opportunity to explain that protocol to the surveyor so that they understand what you have been prepared your staff for, and usually they'll work with you. So you'll need to request, explain your protocol, and then request that the surveyors permit your provider team to accompany them during the survey. You want to take this opportunity to create a good rapport with your surveyors, because a survey goes much more smoothly if you have a rapport with the surveyors. And sometimes you can't establish that rapport, but it is important to be cordial, respectful, and to have start everything off with on a good foot during this entrance conference. You need to establish that rapport, and then that gives you the opportunity to use the relationship and ask questions and to gather information. If you don't have a good relationship, you're not going to be able to get information from your surveyors. But if you have a cordial, respectful relationship, they're gonna work with you. So establish that relationship, and then try to use this opportunity to fully understand why the survey is taking place. So you ask questions, you clarify, try to get a sense of what type of survey is going on, if it's a complaint, what was the underlying complaint, and try to get as much information as you can. And then finally, you want to take notes. You want to take notes about the information that's provided by the surveyors. You want to get the names of each surveyor who has come on site, and you will, throughout the process, you'll need to take good notes on the survey and what is said and who says what.
So this slide looks further into the actual survey. Surveyors are going to conduct observations, interviews, and document review. They will visit patient care settings, observe the provision of care in your organization, and make assessments related to that care and the services provided. Members of the survey team will meet throughout the survey process to discuss whether the hospital is in substantial compliance with the Medicare COPs. Again, as Allison said, your personnel needs to be very cordial and respectful to these surveyors. If your provider team is allowed to accompany the surveyors through the survey, ensure that no one is confrontational or argumentative, but at the same time, they should be able to seek clarification if surveyors express concerns or make comments about the organization's operations. And if the surveyor identifies an area of noncompliance while your provider team is with them, someone on that team should request the surveyor to identify the relevant tag The surveyor isn't required to provide that information, but it doesn't hurt to ask, and again, that will help the organization, as soon as the exit conference is over, prepare any response that may be necessary.
When the surveyors find a hospital to be out of compliance with the conditions of participation to such an extent that patients are in immediate jeopardy, then the surveyors will issue an immediate jeopardy citation. As Elizabeth discussed previously, when such a citation is issued, the hospital is put on the 23-day termination track. This means that the surveyors have identified situations that have the potential to cause serious harm or death to patients, and that if they're not immediately corrected, then the provider should be terminated. CMS recently revised its guidance on how surveyors issue IJ or immediate jeopardy citations. Now surveyors must prepare a written immediate jeopardy template in which the surveyor documents the reasons for 3 findings. In this template or this report, the surveyor must first conclude that the provider failed to meet one or more federal health, safety, and/or quality regulations. To complete the template for this conclusion, surveyors must identify the regulatory tags with which the provider failed to comply and summarize the issues that led to the surveyor's findings of noncompliance. Second, the surveyor must conclude that the provider's noncompliance with regulations caused or created a likelihood that serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to one or more patients would occur. Note that the provider's noncompliance needs to be a contributing factor, not the sole factor that led to the risk of harm. In making this conclusion, the surveyor must identify the harm that occurred or that is reasonably expected to occur. Such harm can include psychosocial harm, such as a change in mood or behavior. So this new language where CMS has recognized that psychosocial harm is relevant and can be used to issue an immediate jeopardy citation definitely broadens the authority for IJ citations to be issued. So be on watch for that. Finally, to issue an IJ determination, the surveyor must conclude that immediate action is needed to correct the noncompliance. In response to this IJ template that the surveyor provides, the provider will now need to prepare a written IJ removal plan. So previously, when surveyors determined that there was an immediate jeopardy citation issue, what the provider would do was simply get information from the surveyor and then work to correct that immediately. There was nothing that you had to prepare in writing to get the IJ citation removed and knocked down to either a standard deficiency or a condition level deficiency. But now it's necessary to prepare a report outlining how the issues identified in the IJ template will be addressed. Further, this written report is separate and distinct from your CMS 2567 response. So if an IJ citation is issued, you need to do the IJ removal plan, preferably while the surveyors are on site. And then thereafter, whenever you get your 2567 report identifying condition level and standard level deficiencies, you'll still have to do your response report to that as well. If a provider fails to remove the IJ situation prior to the end of the survey, the provider will be placed on the 23-day termination track. And the provider's Medicare number will automatically terminate on the 23rd day unless the provider either alleges compliance in the 2567 response and demonstrates such compliance during a resurvey. If the IJ is removed during the survey and condition level deficiencies are cited, then the provider will be placed on the 90-day termination track. It is paramount that providers remove IJ situations during a survey if they want to avoid termination. It is very difficult to avoid termination if the immediate jeopardy situation is not corrected prior to the end of the survey and the provider is placed on the 23-day termination track. So it is advisable for providers to notify their legal counsel when an IJ citation is made. Legal counsel can be instrumental in preparing the written removal plan and helping the provider avoid the fast track termination. Also, it's helpful to have someone there preparing this new written report so that the provider can focus on getting the tasks done to remove that situation.
Next, we're going to look at what to expect during the exit conference and practical tips for handling that conference. During the exit conference, surveyors should describe all the deficiencies found during the survey. The State Operations Manual indicates the purpose of the exit conference is to, quote, informally communicate preliminary survey team findings and provide an opportunity for the interchange of information, especially if there are differences of opinion. Despite this instruction, some surveyors don't always encourage much discussion during the exit conference. Nonetheless, you need to use the time you have to benefit your organization and get as much information as possible. First, we recommend that you tape record the exit conference. The hospital is going to be expected to start addressing the deficiencies identified in the exit conference immediately based on the timelines we've talked about. So to ensure that you can adequately address those deficiencies, we recommend tape recording the entire exit conference. However, you need to have 2 tape recorders available to make 2 different tapes because the surveyors are not going to agree to a tape recording unless they are allowed to leave with a copy. Second, correct any misinformation that's brought up during the exit conference. While surveyors may steer the exit conference to be a presentation of findings without any input from the hospital, if there are errors or missing facts or something the surveyors have just simply got wrong, you should seek to provide correct information to the surveyors. Ask for tag numbers relevant to the deficiencies that are cited. The State Operations Manual instructs surveyors not to reveal tag numbers or identify deficiencies as standard or condition level. The answer may be no, but again, it just does not hurt to ask. And lastly, we've said this a few times, but take notes. To supplement your recording, if you're allowed to make one, your note should identify the name of each surveyor who speaks and the points or issues he or she brings up during the exit conference.
Following the survey, the surveyors will draft the CMS 2567 report, which will detail the findings from the survey and categorize the deficiencies as either standard level or condition level. If condition level deficiencies are found, then the provider will be placed on the 90-day termination track. This means that the hospital's Medicare number will be terminated unless prior to the 90th day following the exit conference, the hospital presents a credible allegation of compliance in a written response to the 2567 report and demonstrates such compliance during a survey. After the exit conference, there will be an inclination to wait for the 2567 report. In fact, from my experience, that's what most hospitals do. They get the information during the exit conference. They know that they're going to get deficiencies on the 2567 report, but they just wait. They don't do anything. It's important that you ignore this inclination and this what seems to be standard practice. If the surveyors end up labeling a deficiency as a condition level deficiency, the hospital will be expected to have corrected that issue by the time the provider submits a response. That means if you wait until you receive the 2567 report, you will only have 10 calendar days, not only to draft the response, but also correct the issue. This is generally just not enough time. So we recommend that hospitals take immediate action to correct deficiencies discussed during the exit conference, even if you don't know the tag number, the applicable citation, you can still take action, and then that can be used and converted into a proper written response. But you definitely don't want to wait on that matter. Similarly, there will be an inclination to wallow in poor me stories. We are all aware of situations involving uncooperative surveyors and bizarre findings, like a deficiency based on a thin layer of dust on equipment. While unjust situations and problematic surveyors should be addressed, this is not the time to focus on those issues. If that is the focus, it can hinder the hospital's ability to energize staff in implementing the necessary corrective actions. Your goal after the survey is to take steps necessary to ensure your Medicare number is not terminated. That's the primary goal, and you can adjust. You can talk about what was unjust later and address those unjust situations. File necessary complaints, but your focus should be to bring the hospital into whatever compliance is needed. Immediately following the exit conference, assemble a response team consisting of key leaders. Some hospitals find it beneficial to have 1 or 2 individuals per deficiency on the team. Each person is then assigned a deficiency and is responsible for preparing and implementing a plan of correction for that deficiency. The hospital may also need to engage an outside consultant. For example, I recently worked on a corrective action plan that required revisions to an automated process in the provider's electronic medical record system. To accomplish this task, the provider engaged an outside consultant to help program the system in a manner that would help avoid the problems that had arisen under the prior system. Additionally, many of our clients involve us at this point. We help our clients assess the potential COPs and tags that may be cited by the surveyor, which can help in developing a preliminary corrective action plan that can be easily converted into a written response once that 2567 report is received. We also help our clients draft the response to the 2567 report. Careful drafting is especially needed when corrective actions involve disciplinary or confidential actions. Also, if the corrective action plan requires new construction or equipment purchases that cannot be completed immediately, it is important to word the response in a manner that nevertheless alleges compliance as of the date of response so that you can be taken off the 90-day termination track. The response team should consolidate notes, pull all records reviewed by the surveyor, and review a transcript of the exit conference. The response team should then dissect each deficiency. What occurred? Why did it occur? What will be done to avoid the reoccurrence? After analyzing the deficiencies, the response team should create and implement a preliminary plan of correction that includes immediate steps to correct the deficiency, permanent corrective actions to ensure the deficiency does not reoccur, monitoring procedures, and a person who will be responsible for overseeing that corrective action plan.
So now let's look at the 2567 report, what it actually looks like. Approximately 10 business days after the exit conference, the providers will receive the 2567 detailing surveyor's findings. This form will be accompanied by a cover letter. The cover letter is a crucial document and should be read carefully. It will have key dates and instructions for preparing the response. The 2567 has 5 columns. The first 3 columns will be completed by the survey agency. In the second column, there will be a full citation to the regulatory condition in the Code of Federal Regulations that the provider allegedly did not meet. In this column, the surveyor will also provide a detailed description of the findings and evidence supporting the surveyor's conclusion. It is not unusual for this section to be highly repetitive and hard to follow, but be careful to take time to read each finding to ascertain exactly what's being cited as a deficiency and what may be extra information. In the first and third columns, the surveyor will identify the tags associated with the interpretive guidance in the State Operations Manual. The interpretive guidance outlines CMS's expectations for the cited regulation and is a key resource in helping to develop your plan of correction. The fourth column has traditionally been the space for entering the provider's response. CMS has authorized state survey agencies to accept responses on separate documents and also electronically, but whether the surveyor will accept such documents in what manner will vary from agency to agency. And in the fifth column, the provider will identify the date on which the plan of correction has been or will be completed.
The provider's response will vary based on whether any condition level deficiencies are cited by the surveyor. Typically, if the condition level deficiencies are not involved, the provider will be expected to present an acceptable plan of correction. On the other hand, if condition level deficiencies are found, the provider will be required to submit a credible allegation of compliance. That is, what has been done prior to submission of the response to correct the deficiency. Generally, the provider's response should include the following 4 elements. This list outlines the general elements that are found in the provider's response, but note that the cover letter will include instructions regarding the content of the provider's response, which may vary from this list. You should follow the instructions on the cover letter. Nevertheless, these elements, though they may be worded differently, pretty much are the same across the board. First, the response must generally include corrective measures that the provider either put or will put in place to correct the deficiency and to ensure the deficiency does not reoccur. To develop the corrective measure, we recommend that the providers identify the root cause of the alleged deficiency. For example, suppose that the surveyor's findings state that the nursing assessments were not completed at the intervals required by the provider's policy. Upon further review, the hospital finds that the assessments were indeed completed timely, but documentation was entered after the fact without notation of the actual time of the assessment. In this case, the fix may be to train staff on both the timely intervals and the appropriate documentation practices for nursing assessments. The provider response will need to include steps that the provider will take to monitor and ensure compliance with the applicable corrective measures and related conditions of participation. For example, a chart review is a way to monitor for compliance. In addition to identifying the monitoring method, be sure to identify a committee or department head who will receive the reports from the monitoring activities and who will incorporate such information into the provider's quality assessment and a performance improvement plan. Further, it is advisable to include a plan of action in the event the monitoring tools reveal ongoing noncompliance. For example, let's say that your monitoring is that you're going to review 9 out of 10 charts for a period of time. If in your chart review you identify non-compliance, then you might want to include in your plan of correction that non-compliance will be addressed through one-on-one coaching, some kind of education with the particular individual who is found to be out of compliance in that monitoring effort. The plan of correction will need to include the responsible person. This person is the person who's responsible for the overall monitoring of the corrective action plan. It's typically the primary supervisor who is identified in the plan of correction. So if the deficiency is relating to something regarding the nursing staff, the director of nursing is going to be the one who is the responsible person. Other individuals will definitely be involved in the corrective measures, and such individuals can be discussed in the plan, but they're not going to be identified as the responsible person. The responsible person should be the individual who is tasked with the oversight of that particular condition of participation. Finally, the provider's response should include dates by which the corrective and monitoring measures will be implemented. In drafting the response, the goal is to include enough detail about the action steps that the surveyors can envision the fix and understand its detail without having the actual documents in hand. For example, if the corrective action involved new or revised policies or signage, a provider does not necessarily want a surveyor to have such documents for an extended period of time. So you don't want the surveyor investigating and looking for minute issues with your policies. So we recommend that the providers not append or the revised documents to the 2567 response. Instead, your 2567 response should include enough details about those revisions that the surveyor can understand what was revised in the new policy without actually having to review that document. The corrective measures and monitoring plan should be specific and tailored to the concerns cited by the surveyor. It is important to avoid making the plan of correction overbroad and including unnecessary measures. Similarly, do not overstate the corrective measures. Don't overpromise. The provider's written response will serve as a roadmap for the survey agency when the agency returns for resurvey. If the hospital has not followed through with the corrective measures outlined in the written response, the surveyors may cite the hospital for additional deficiencies. In drafting the provider's response, keep in mind that it is a public document. It is important to carefully draft the response to minimize adverse publicity and to reassure the public about the hospital. Additionally, it is important to ensure that the response does not include any confidential or privileged information. Along these lines, a provider may find it necessary and appropriate to take disciplinary actions to address the deficiencies uncovered during a survey. Because of the potential liability for medical staff members and others and the expectation of confidentiality under certain state laws, it is advisable to have counsel opine on how to describe such action in the provider's response to the survey findings. When drafting the response, there may be an inclination to challenge or otherwise debase the credibility of the surveyor's findings. Generally, the provider will be successful in such challenges only if the provider can readily show that the facts identified by the surveyor were wrong. If objections are made, they must be made delicately. You do not want to upset your surveyor because especially if you are on a termination track. So objections in written 2567 responses should be carefully drafted to avoid offending the survey agency. As an alternative to including the challenge in the response, the provider may want to informally contest the findings in the cover letter, which would not be a public document.
So now let's look at appeals. When a provider receives condition-level citations or an immediate jeopardy finding, the provider will be either placed on a 90-day or 23-day termination track, and the provider will be given the opportunity to appeal that decision. The first level of appeal is the ALJ hearing. To request a hearing, the provider must file the request in writing within 60 days of the date on which the provider received the termination notice. During that hearing, CMS will have the burden of demonstrating why the provider should be terminated. If either party is dissatisfied with the ALJ's ruling, then that party can request a review by the Departmental Appeal Board. If the hospital is dissatisfied with the DAB ruling, then the hospital is entitled to seek judicial review. Generally, providers should request an appeal upon receipt of the notice of termination. This is true even if you plan to implement a plan of correction. If the provider is later determined to be in compliance, then we can withdraw that appeal request. With that said, and we do think that it is important to request that immediately upon receipt, you don't want to focus all your efforts on the appeal. Even if the provider is able to win at the appeal level, the appeal is probably not going to take place until after the termination occurs. Thus, you're going to have this period of disruption in operation, and you're going to lose probably a fair amount of confidence and have some PR issues to deal with. So the safest and advisable course of action is to prepare an adequate plan of correction, address the identified deficiencies, and avoid termination. The appeal request is just a safety net.
Finally, we will discuss the top 3 deficiencies cited against hospitals. The most frequently cited deficiency is noncompliance with 42 CFR 482.13c2, which states that the patient has the right to receive care in a safe setting. A hospital will be found deficient under this regulation if a surveyor finds issues with the hospital's environmental safety, infection control, or security. Under this regulation, CMS also expects hospitals to identify patients at risk for self-harm or harm to others and to mitigate unique risks to such patients. Furthermore, CMS expects hospitals to have policies and procedures based on nationally recognized standards which guide hospital staff to conduct risk assessments and to implement safety measures. Unique environmental concerns for patients at risk of self-harm or harm to others can include shower curtains, coat hooks, power cords, sharps, harmful substances, access to medications, breakable windows, accessible light fixtures, plastic bags, oxygen tubing, bell cords, unattended housekeeping carts with potential hazardous hazardous items such as cleaning agents, mops, brooms, tools. To mitigate such risks, hospitals may need to implement protocols for one-on-one monitoring and removal of objects that may be used for self-harm or harm to others when that is identified as a potential issue. Finally, CMS expects hospitals to educate and train staff on such risk assessments and mitigation strategies.
The next most common deficiency is under 42 CFR 482.23b3, which requires that a registered nurse supervise and evaluate the nursing care provided for each patient. CMS's interpretive guidance indicates that an RN must evaluate the care for each patient upon admission and on an ongoing basis based on acceptable standards of care and hospital policy. We note that hospitals can be and often actually are cited for failure to follow their own policies. To prepare for a survey, we recommend reviewing policies and ensuring that timing of ongoing assessments is appropriate. Chart reviews should be conducted, and you should ensure that assessments are appropriately documented to show compliance. And always keep in mind that the surveyor's position will be that if it's not documented, it did not happen.
The third most frequently cited deficiency arises under 42 CFR 42.13. Whereas the previous two regulations that we discussed were standards, this regulation is a condition, which requires a hospital to protect and promote each patient's rights. Under this condition, there are a number of standards. In particular, hospitals are frequently cited for violations of the following standards. Grievance process. The hospital is expected to have a grievance process in place. Under the grievance process, the hospital is required to provide each patient instructions for filing a grievance. Further, the governing board must timely review and resolve the grievance unless the board delegates the review and resolution to a grievance committee in writing. Another standard that's often cited to support a condition level deficiency is safe setting. This is a standard that we discussed in the first slide. Depending on the extent of the deficiency, failure to comply with this single standard can result in a condition level finding. Confidentiality of records. Under this standard, a patient has the right to confidentiality of his or her records. Further, each patient has the right to access information maintained in his or her records. Restraint or seclusion. Another standard that is often accompanies the citation under patient rights is this particular standard for restraint and seclusion. This standard outlines requirements that are designed to ensure hospitals implement the least restrictive intervention for necessary restraints or seclusion, and that such interventions are properly ordered, monitored, and discontinued. To prepare for a survey, we recommend that hospitals review and update their policies and procedures for grievances, confidentiality of and access to records, and implementation of restraints and seclusions. Be sure to train staff on these particular issues and any updates to policies and procedures that are made by the hospital. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss these issues with you, and we are happy at this time to take any questions that you may have. And if you would prefer to ask questions offline, then feel free to email either Elizabeth or me. We're happy to respond to those questions as well.